Welcome back to Classic Literature Free Audiobooks. If you missed previous chapters, you can find the full playlist in the description. Now, let the story continue with the Sea Wolf. Chapter 9. 3 days of rest, 3 blessed days of rest, are what I had with Wolf Larsen, eating at the cabin table and doing nothing but discuss life, literature, and the universe. The while Thomas Mugridge fumed and raged, and did my work as well as his own. "Watch out for squalls, is all I can say to you," was Louis's warning, given during a spare half-hour on deck, while Wolf Larsen was engaged in straightening out a row among the hunters. "Ye can't tell what'll be happening," Louis went on, in response to my query for more definite information. "The man's as contrary as air currents or water currents. You can never guess the ways roaming for him. T's just as you're thinking. You know him, and a mackin', a favourable slant along him, that he whirls around, dead ahead, and comes howling, down upon you and ripping, all roaming for your fine weather sails to rags." So I was not altogether surprised when the squall foretold by Louis smote me. We had been having a heated discussion, upon life, of course, and grown overbold. I was passing stiff strictures upon Wolf Larsen and the life of Wolf Larsen. In fact, I was vivisecting him and turning over his soul stuff as keenly and thoroughly as it was his custom to do it to others. It may be a weakness of mine that I have an incisive way of speech, but I threw all restraint to the winds and cut and slashed until the whole man of him was snarling. The dark sun-bronze of his face went black with wrath. His eyes were ablaze. There was no clearness or sanity in them, nothing but the terrific rage of a madman. It was the wolf in him that I saw, and a mad wolf at that. He sprang for me with a half-roar, gripping my arm. I had steeled myself to brazen it out, though I was trembling inwardly. But the enormous strength of the man was too much for my fortitude. He had gripped me by the biceps with his single hand, and when that grip tightened I wilted and shrieked aloud. My feet went out from under me. I simply could not stand upright and endure the agony. The muscles refused their duty. The pain was too great. My biceps was being crushed to a pulp. He seemed to recover himself, for a lucid gleam came into his eyes, and he relaxed his hold with a short laugh that was more like a growl. I fell to the floor, feeling very faint, while he sat down, lighted a cigar, and watched me as a cat watches a mouse. As I writhed about, I could see in his eyes that curiosity I had so often noted, that wonder and perplexity, that questing, that everlasting query of his as to what it was all about. I finally crawled to my feet and ascended the companion stairs. Fair weather was over, and there was nothing left but to return to the galley. My left arm was numb, as though paralyzed, and days passed before I could use it, while weeks went by before the last stiffness and pain went out of it, and he had done nothing but put his hand upon my arm and squeeze. There had been no wrenching or jerking. He had just closed his hand with a steady pressure. What he might have done I did not fully realize till next day, when he put his head into the galley, and as a sign of renewed friendliness, asked me how my arm was getting on. "It might have been worse," he smiled. I was peeling potatoes. He picked one up from the pan. It was fair-sized, firm, and unpeeled. He closed his hand upon it, squeezed, and the potato squirted out between his fingers in mushy streams. The pulpy remnant he dropped back into the pan and turned away, and I had a sharp vision of how it might have fared with me had the monster put his real strength upon me. But the 3 days' rest was good in spite of it all, for it had given my knee the very chance it needed. It felt much better, the swelling had materially decreased, and the cap seemed descending into its proper place. Also, the 3 days' rest brought the trouble I had foreseen. It was plainly Thomas Mugridge's intention to make me pay for those 3 days. He treated me vilely, cursed me continually, and heaped his own work upon me. He even ventured to raise his fist to me, but I was becoming animal-like myself, and I snarled in his face so terribly that it must have frightened him back. It is no pleasant picture I can conjure up of myself, Humphrey van Weyden, in that noisome ship's galley, crouched in a corner over my task, my face raised to the face of the creature about to strike me, my lips lifted and snarling like a dog's, my eyes gleaming with fear and helplessness, and the courage that comes of fear and helplessness. I do not like the picture. It reminds me too strongly of a rat in a trap. I do not care to think of it, but it was effective, for the threatened blow did not descend. Thomas Mugridge backed away, glaring as hatefully and viciously as I glared. A pair of beasts is what we were, pennied together and showing our teeth. He was a coward, afraid to strike me because I had not quailed sufficiently in advance. So he chose a new way to intimidate me. There was only one galley knife that, as a knife, amounted to anything. This, through many years of service and wear, had acquired a long, lean blade. It was unusually cruel-looking, and at first I had shuddered every time I used it. The cook borrowed a stone from Johansen and proceeded to sharpen the knife. He did it with great ostentation, glancing significantly at me the while. He whetted it up and down all day long. Every odd moment he could find he had the knife and stone out and was whetting away. The steel acquired a razor edge. He tried it with the ball of his thumb or across the nail. He shaved hairs from the back of his hand, glanced along the edge with microscopic acuteness, and found, or feigned that he found, always, a slight inequality in its edge somewhere. Then he would put it on the stone again and whet, till I could have laughed aloud. It was so very ludicrous. It was also serious, for I learned that he was capable of using it, that under all his cowardice there was a courage of cowardice, like mine, that would impel him to do the very thing his whole nature protested against doing and was afraid of doing. Cookie's sharpening his knife for Hump was being whispered about among the sailors, and some of them twitted him about it. This he took in good part, and was really pleased, nodding his head with direful foreknowledge and mystery, until George Leach, the erstwhile cabin boy, ventured some rough pleasantry on the subject. Now it happened that Leach was one of the sailors told off to douse Mugridge after his game of cards with the captain. Leach had evidently done his task with a thoroughness that Mugridge had not forgiven, for words followed and evil names involving smirched ancestries. Mugridge menaced with the knife he was sharpening for me. Leach laughed and hurled more of his Telegraph Hill Billingsgate, and before either he or I knew what had happened, his right arm had been ripped open from elbow to wrist by a quick slash of the knife. The cook backed away, a fiendish expression on his face, the knife held before him in a position of defense. But Leach took it quite calmly, though blood was spouting upon the deck as generously as water from a fountain. "I'm going to get you, Cookie," he said, "and I'll get you hard, and I won't be in no hurry about it. You'll be without that knife when I come for you." So saying, he turned and walked quietly forward. Mugridge's face was livid with fear at what he had done, and at what he might expect sooner or later from the man he had stabbed. But his demeanour toward me was more ferocious than ever. In spite of his fear at the reckoning, he must expect to pay for what he had done. He could see that it had been an object lesson to me, and he became more domineering and exultant. Also there was a lust in him, akin to madness, which had come with sight of the blood he had drawn. He was beginning to see red in whatever direction he looked. The psychology of it is sadly tangled, and yet I could read the workings of his mind as clearly as though it were a printed book. Several days went by, the ghost still foaming down the trades, and I could swear I saw madness growing in Thomas Mugridge's eyes. And I confess that I became afraid, very much afraid. Wet. It went all day long. The look in his eyes as he felt the keen edge and glared at me was positively carnivorous. I was afraid to turn my shoulder to him, and when I left the galley, I went out backwards, to the amusement of the sailors and hunters, who made a point of gathering in groups to witness my exit. The strain was too great. I sometimes thought my mind would give way under it, a meat thing on this ship of madmen and brutes. Every hour, every minute of my existence was in jeopardy. I was a human soul in distress, and yet no soul, fore or aft, betrayed sufficient sympathy to come to my aid. At times I thought of throwing myself on the mercy of Wolf Larsen, but the vision of the mocking devil in his eyes that questioned life and sneered at it would come strong upon me and compel me to refrain. At other times I seriously contemplated suicide, and the whole force of my hopeful philosophy was required to keep me from going over the side in the darkness of night. Several times Wolf Larsen tried to inveigle me into discussion, but I gave him short answers and eluded him. Finally, he commanded me to resume my seat at the cabin table for a time and let the cook do my work. Then I spoke frankly, telling him what I was enduring from Thomas Mugridge because of the 3 days of favoritism which had been shown me. Wolf Larsen regarded me with smiling eyes. "So you're afraid, eh?" he sneered. "Yes," I said defiantly and honestly, "I am afraid." "That's the way with you fellows," he cried, half angrily, "sentimentalizing about your immortal souls and afraid to die. At sight of a sharp knife and a cowardly cockney, the clinging of life to life overcomes all your fond foolishness. Why, my dear fellow, you will live forever. You are a god, and God cannot be killed. Cookie cannot hurt you. You are sure of your resurrection. What's there to be afraid of? You have eternal life before you. You are a millionaire in immortality, and a millionaire whose fortune cannot be lost, whose fortune is less perishable than the stars and as lasting as space or time. It is impossible for you to diminish your principle. Immortality is a thing without beginning or end. Eternity is eternity, and though you die here and now, you will go on living somewhere else and hereafter. And it is all very beautiful, this shaking off of the flesh and soaring of the imprisoned spirit. Cookie cannot hurt you. He can only give you a boost on the path you eternally must tread. Or, if you do not wish to be boosted just yet, why not boost Cookie? According to your ideas, he too must be an immortal millionaire. You cannot bankrupt him. His paper will always circulate at par. You cannot diminish the length of his living by killing him, for he is without beginning or end. He's bound to go on living somewhere, somehow. Then boost him. Stick a knife in him and let his spirit free. As it is, it's in a nasty prison, and you'll do him only a kindness by breaking down the door. And who knows? It may be a very beautiful spirit that will go soaring up into the blue from that ugly carcass. Boost him along, and I'll promote you to his place, and he's getting $45 a month. It was plain that I could look for no help or mercy from Wolf Larsen. Whatever was to be done, I must do for myself, and out of the courage of fear, I evolved the plan of fighting Thomas Mugridge with his own weapons. I borrowed a whetstone from Johansson. Louis, the boat steerer, had already begged me for condensed milk and sugar. The lazarette, where such delicacies were stored, was situated beneath the cabin floor. Watching my chance, I stole 5 cans of the milk, and that night, when it was Louis's watch on deck, I traded them with him for a dirk as lean and cruel-looking as Thomas Mugridge's vegetable knife. It was rusty and dull, but I turned the grindstone while Louis gave it an edge. I slept more soundly than usual that night. Next morning after breakfast, Thomas Mugridge began his wet. I glanced warily at him, for I was on my knees taking the ashes from the stove. When I returned from throwing them overside, he was talking to Harrison, whose honest yokel's face was filled with fascination and wonder. "Yes," Mugridge was saying, "and what does his worship do but give me 2 years in reading? But blimey if I cared. The other mug was fixed plenty. Should have seen knife just like this. I stuck it in, like into soft butter, and the WIE squealed was bettin' a 2-penny gaff. He shot a glance in my direction to see if I was taking it in, and went on. I didn't mean it, Tommy, he was sniffling. So help me Gord, I didn't mean it. I'll fix you bloody well right, I says, and kept right after I cut in ribbons. That's what I did, and a squealing all the time. Once he got his, and on the knife and tried to hold it. Add his fingers around it, but I pulled it through, cutting to the bone. Oh, he was a sight, I can tell yer. A call from the mate interrupted the gory narrative, and Harrison went aft. Mugridge sat down on the raised threshold to the galley and went on with his knife sharpening. I put the shovel away and calmly sat down on the coal box facing him. He favoured me with a vicious stare. Still calmly, though my heart was going pit-a-pat, I pulled out Louis's dirk and began to wet it on the stone. I had looked for almost any sort of explosion on the Cockney's part, but to my surprise, he did not appear aware of what I was doing. He went on wetting his knife. So did I, and for 2 hours we sat there, face to face, wet, 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 till the news of it spread abroad and half the ship's company was crowding the galley doors to see the sight. Encouragement and advice were freely tendered, and Jock Horner, the quiet, self-spoken hunter who looked as though he would not harm a mouse, advised me to leave the ribs alone and to thrust upward for the abdomen, at the same time giving what he called the Spanish twist to the blade. Leach, his bandaged arm prominently to the fore, begged me to leave a few remnants of the cook for him, and Wolf Larsen paused once or twice at the break of the poop to glance curiously at what must have been to him a stirring and crawling of the yeasty thing he knew as life. And I make free to say that for the time being life assumed the same sordid values to me. There was nothing pretty about it, nothing divine, only 2 cowardly moving things that sat wetting steel upon stone, and a group of other moving things, cowardly and otherwise, that looked on. Half of them, I am sure, were anxious to see us shedding each other's blood. It would have been entertainment, and I do not think there was one who would have interfered had we closed in a death struggle. On the other hand, the whole thing was laughable and childish. Wet, wet, wet. Humphrey van Weyden sharpening his knife in a ship's galley and trying its edge with his thumb. Of all situations, this was the most inconceivable. I know that my own kind could not have believed it possible. I had not been called Sissy Van Weyden all my days without reason, and that Sissy Van Weyden should be capable of doing this thing was a revelation to Humphrey van Weyden, who knew not whether to be exultant or ashamed. But nothing happened. At the end of 2 hours, Thomas Mugridge put away knife and stone and held out his hand. "What's the good of making a ollie show of ourselves for the mugs?" he demanded. "They don't love us, and bloody well glad they be seeing us cutting our throats. You're not half bad, You've got spunk as you Yanks SI, and I like yer in a WI. So come on and shike." Coward that I might be, I was less a coward than he. It was a distinct victory I had gained, and I refused to forgo any of it by shaking his detestable hand. "All right," he said pridelessly. "Take it or leave it. I'll like you none the less for it." And to save his face, he turned fiercely upon the onlookers. "Get out my galley doors, you bloomin' swabs." This command was reinforced by a steaming kettle of water, and at sight of it the sailors scrambled out of the way. This was a sort of victory for Thomas Mugridge, and enabled him to accept more gracefully the defeat I had given him, though, of course, he was too discreet to attempt to drive the hunters away. "I see Cookie's finish," I heard Smoke say to Horner. "You bet," was the reply. "Hump runs the galley from now on, and Cookie pulls in his horns." Mugridge heard and shot a swift glance at me, but I gave no sign that the conversation had reached me. I had not thought my victory was so far-reaching and complete, but I resolved to let go nothing I had gained. As the days went by, Smoke's prophecy was verified. The Cockney became more humble and slavish to me than even to Wolf Larsen. I misted him and served him no longer, washed no more greasy pots, and peeled no more potatoes. I did my own work, and my own work only, and when and in what fashion I saw fit. Also I carried the dirk in a sheath at my hip, sailor fashion, and maintained toward Thomas Mugridge a constant attitude which was composed of equal parts of domineering, insult, and contempt. Next chapter, chapter 10. My intimacy with Wolf Larsen increases. If by intimacy may be denoted those relations which exist between master and man, or, better yet, between king and jester. I am to him no more than a toy, and he values me no more than a child values a toy. My function is to amuse, and so long as I amuse all goes well. But let him become bored, or let him have one of his black moods come upon him, and at once I am relegated from cabin table to galley, while at the same time I am fortunate to escape with my life and a whole body. The loneliness of the man is slowly being borne in upon me. There is not a man aboard but hates or fears him, nor is there a man whom he does not despise. He seems consuming with the tremendous power that is in him, and that seems never to have found adequate expression in works. He is as Lucifer would be, were that proud spirit banished to a society of soulless, Tomlinsonian ghosts. This loneliness is bad enough in itself, but to make it worse, he is oppressed by the primal melancholy of the race. Knowing him, I review the old Scandinavian myths with clearer understanding. The white-skinned, fair-haired savages who created that terrible pantheon were of the same fibre as he. The frivolity of the laughter-loving Latins is no part of him. When he laughs, it is from a humour that is nothing else than ferocious. But he laughs rarely, he is too often sad. And it is a sadness as deep-reaching as the roots of the race. It is the race heritage, the sadness which has made the race sober-minded, clean-lived and fanatically moral, and which, in this latter connection, has culminated among the English in the Reformed Church and Mrs. Grundy. In point of fact, the chief vent to this primal melancholy has been religion in its more agonizing forms. But the compensations of such religion are denied Wolf Larsen. His brutal materialism will not permit it. So, when his blue moods come on, nothing remains for him but to be devilish. Were he not so terrible a man, I could sometimes feel sorry for him, as instance 3 mornings ago, when I went into his stateroom to fill his water bottle and came unexpectedly upon him. He did not see me. His head was buried in his hands, and his shoulders were heaving convulsively as with sobs. He seemed torn by some mighty grief. As I softly withdrew, I could hear him groaning, "God, God, God," not that he was calling upon God. It was a mere expletive, but it came from his soul. At dinner he asked the hunters for a remedy for headache, and by evening, strong man that he was half blind and reeling about the cabin. "I've never been sick in my life, Hump," he said, as I guided him to his room. Nor did I ever have a headache except the time my head was healing after having been laid open for 6 inches by a capstan bar. For 3 days this blinding headache lasted, and he suffered as wild animals suffer, as it seemed the way on ship to suffer, without plaint, without sympathy, utterly alone. This morning, however, on entering his stateroom to make the bed and put things in order, I found him well and hard at work. Table and bunk were littered with designs and calculations. On a large transparent sheet, compass and square in hand, he was copying what appeared to be a scale of some sort or other. "Hello, Hump," he greeted me genially. "I'm just finishing the finishing touches. Want to see it work." "But what is it?" I asked. "A labor-saving device for mariners, navigation reduced to kindergarten simplicity," he answered gaily. "From today, a child will be able to navigate a ship. No more long-winded calculations. All you need is one star in the sky on a dirty night to know instantly where you are. Look. I place the transparent scale on this star map, revolving the scale on the North Pole. On the scale, I've worked out the circles of altitude and the lines of bearing. All I do is to put it on a star, revolve the scale till it is opposite those figures on the map underneath, and presto, there you are, the ship's precise location. There was a ring of triumph in his voice, and his eyes, clear blue this morning as the sea, were sparkling with light. "You must be well up in mathematics," I said. "Where did you go to school?" "Never saw the inside of one, worse luck," was the answer. "I had to dig it out for myself." "And why do you think I have made this thing?" he demanded, abruptly. "Dreaming to leave footprints on the sands of time." He laughed one of his horrible, mocking laughs. "Not at all. To get it patented, to make money from it, to revel in piggishness with all night in while other men do the work. That's my purpose. Also, I have enjoyed working it out." "The creative joy," I murmured. "I guess that's what it ought to be called, which is another way of expressing the joy of life in that it is alive, the triumph of movement over matter, of the quick over the dead, the pride of the yeast because it is yeast and crawls." I threw up my hands with helpless disapproval of his inveterate materialism and went about making the bed. He continued copying lines and figures upon the transparent scale. It was a task requiring the utmost nicety and precision, and I could not but admire the way he tempered his strength to the fineness and delicacy of the need. When I had finished the bed, I caught myself looking at him in a fascinated sort of way. He was certainly a handsome man, beautiful in the masculine sense. And again, with never-failing wonder, I remarked the total lack of viciousness, or wickedness, or sinfulness in his face. It was the face, I am convinced, of a man who did no wrong. And by this, I do not wish to be misunderstood. What I mean is that it was the face of a man who either did nothing contrary to the dictates of his conscience, or who had no conscience. I am inclined to the latter way of accounting for it. He was a magnificent atavism, a man so purely primitive that he was of the type that came into the world before the development of the moral nature. He was not immoral, but merely unmoral. As I have said, in the masculine sense his was a beautiful face. Smooth-shaven, every line was distinct, and it was cut as clear and sharp as a cameo, while sea and sun had tanned the naturally fair skin to a dark bronze which bespoke struggle and battle, and added both to his savagery and his beauty. The lips were full, yet possessed of the firmness, almost harshness, which is characteristic of thin lips. The set of his mouth, his chin, his jaw, was likewise firm or harsh, with all the fierceness and indomitableness of the male. The nose also. It was the nose of a being born to conquer and command. It just hinted of the eagle beak. It might have been Grecian, it might have been Roman, only it was a shade too massive for the one, a shade too delicate for the other. And while the whole face was the incarnation of fierceness and strength, the primal melancholy from which he suffered seemed to greaten the lines of mouth and eye and brow, seemed to give a largeness and completeness which otherwise the face would have lacked. And so I caught myself standing idly and studying him. I cannot say how greatly the man had come to interest me. Who was he? What was he? How had he happened to be? All powers seemed his, all potentialities. Why, then, was he no more than the obscure master of a seal-hunting schooner, with a reputation for frightful brutality amongst the men who hunted seals? My curiosity burst from me in a flood of speech. Why is it that you have not done great things in this world? With the power that is yours you might have risen to any height. Unpossessed of conscience or moral instinct, you might have mastered the world, broken it to your hand. And yet here you are at the top of your life, where diminishing and dying begin, living an obscure and sordid existence, hunting sea animals for the satisfaction of woman's vanity and love of decoration, reveling in a piggishness, to use your own words, which is anything and everything except splendid. Why, with all that wonderful strength, have you not done something? There was nothing to stop you, nothing that could stop you. What was wrong? Did you lack ambition? Did you fall under temptation? What was the matter? What was the matter? He had lifted his eyes to me at the commencement of my outburst, and followed me complacently until I had done, and stood before him breathless and dismayed. He waited a moment, as though seeking where to begin, and then said, "Hump, do you know the parable of the sower who went forth to sow? If you will remember, some of the seed fell upon stony places, where there was not much earth, and forthwith they sprung up because they had no deepness of earth. And when the sun was up they were scorched, and because they had no root they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them." "Well," I said. "Well," he queried, half petulantly. It was not well. I was one of those seeds. He dropped his head to the scale and resumed the copying. I finished my work and had opened the door to leave when he spoke to me. "Hump, if you will look on the west coast of the map of Norway, you will see an indentation called Romsdal Fjord. I was born within 100 miles of that stretch of water, but I was not born Norwegian. I am a Dane. My father and mother were Danes, and how they ever came to that bleak bight of land on the west coast, I do not know. I never heard. Outside of that there is nothing mysterious. They were poor people and unlettered. They came of generations of poor unlettered people, peasants of the sea who sowed their sons on the waves, as has been their custom since time began. There is no more to tell." "But there is," I objected. "It is still obscure to me." "What can I tell you?" he demanded, with a recrudescence of fierceness. "Of the meagerness of a child's life, of fish diet and coarse living, of going out with the boats from the time I could crawl, of my brothers, who went away one by one to the deep-sea farming and never came back, of myself, unable to read or write, cabin boy at the mature age of 10 on the coastwise, old country ships, of the rough fare and rougher usage, where kicks and blows were bed and breakfast and took the place of speech, and fear and hatred and pain were my only soul experiences. I do not care to remember. A madness comes up in my brain even now as I think of it. But there were coastwise skippers I would have returned and killed when a man's strength came to me. Only the lines of my life were cast at the time in other places. I did return not long ago, but unfortunately the skippers were dead, all but one, a mate in the old days, a skipper when I met him, and when I left him a cripple who would never walk again. But you who read Spencer and Darwin and have never seen the inside of a school, how did you learn to read and write?" I queried. "In the English merchant service. Cabin boy at 12, ship's boy at 14, ordinary seaman at 16, able seaman at 17, and cock of the forecastle, infinite ambition and infinite loneliness, receiving neither help nor sympathy. I did it all for myself. Navigation, mathematics, science, literature, and what not. And of what use has it been? Master and owner of a ship at the top of my life, as you say, when I am beginning to diminish and die. Paltry, isn't it? And when the sun was up I was scorched, and because I had no root I withered away. But history tells of slaves who rose to the purple," I chided. "And history tells of opportunities that came to the slaves who rose to the purple," he answered grimly. "No man makes opportunity. All the great men ever did was to know it when it came to them. The Corsican knew. I have dreamed as greatly as the Corsican. I should have known the opportunity, but it never came. The thorns sprung up and choked me. And Hump, I can tell you that you know more about me than any living man, except my own brother." "And what is he? And where is he?" "Master of the steamship Macedonia, seal hunter," was the answer. We will meet him most probably on the Japan coast. Men call him Death Larsen. Death Larsen, I involuntarily cried. Is he like you? Hardly. He is a lump of an animal without any head. He has all my brutishness, I suggested. Yes, thank you for the word, all my brutishness, but he can scarcely read or write. And he has never philosophized on life, I added. No, Wolf Larsen answered, with an indescribable air of sadness. And he is all the happier for leaving life alone. He is too busy living it to think about it. My mistake was in ever opening the books. And that wraps up Chapter 9. If you enjoyed it, please like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Want to keep listening? Head over to the next chapter and let it play in the background while you relax or work. Links are in description. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you'll be notified when the next chapters are released. Thanks for listening.